May 1943, Fort Meade, Maryland. A German U-boat crew, captured off the Atlantic coast, sat in a processing center awaiting their first American meal. These men had survived on black bread, canned fish, and ersatz coffee for months at sea. One Kriegsmarine officer, Hans Werner, later told interviewers he expected prison rations to mirror the deprivation he'd known. The Nazi propaganda ministry had spent years describing America as a nation struggling with breadlines and poverty. Then the guards brought in dinner. What happened next contradicted everything they'd been told. Between 1943 and 1945, more than 371,000 German prisoners of war passed through American detention facilities. The United States War Department maintained over 500 prison camps across the continental United States, from Texas to Wisconsin to upstate New York. These prisoners arrived expecting hardship. Nazi propaganda had portrayed America as economically devastated, its people rationing scraps while fighting a war on two fronts. German military intelligence reports reinforced this narrative, suggesting American forces survived on inferior supplies. The reality they encountered challenged those assumptions completely. This is the documented story of how German prisoners of war confronted American food abundance, what official records reveal about their reactions, and how these experiences fundamentally altered their understanding of the nation holding them captive. Every account comes from War Department archives, prisoner interviews conducted by the U.S. government, and declassified reports from the Prisoner of War Operations Division. The transformation began the moment they sat down to eat. Fort Meade, Maryland. May 18, 1943. The U-boat crew from U-175, sunk by Coast Guard cutter Spencer, entered the mess hall for their first meal on American soil. War Department records indicate the standard POW meal that day included roast beef, mashed potatoes, green beans, white bread with butter, coffee, and apple pie. According to interviews archived in the National Archives, several prisoners initially refused to eat, believing the meal was propaganda, a special display meant to impress them before normal rations began. Oberbootsman Heinrich Bleichert stated in his 1946 deposition, "We thought this was a trick. Show us good food once, then give us nothing. We had done this ourselves with prisoners." The guards informed them this was standard daily fare. Camp records from Fort Meade document that German POWs received 4,000 calories per day, exceeding the 3,800 calories provided to American soldiers in training. The Geneva Convention of 1929 required captor nations to feed prisoners rations equal to their own troops. The United States interpreted this literally. By the third day, skepticism turned to confusion. Meals maintained the same abundance. Breakfast included eggs, bacon, toast, jam, and coffee. Lunch featured meat, vegetables, and bread. Dinner repeated the pattern with variations in protein and preparation. A report from the Provost Marshal General's office dated June 1943 noted, "German prisoners at Fort Meade have begun requesting smaller portions, stating they are unaccustomed to such quantities and experiencing digestive difficulties." Medical officers at the camp documented an average weight gain of 15 to 20 pounds per prisoner during their first 3 months of captivity. This was recorded not as a health concern, but as evidence of the nutritional deficit these men had experienced in German military service. The U-boat crew from U-175 was only the beginning. As more prisoners arrived, the pattern repeated across every facility. The United States ratified the Geneva Convention in 1932, committing to specific standards for prisoner treatment. Article 11 stated explicitly, "The food ration of prisoners of war shall be equal in quantity and quality to that of troops at base camps." The U.S. War Department took this obligation seriously. In February 1942, before the first German prisoners arrived in significant numbers, The prisoner of war division established nutritional guidelines. A memorandum from Major General Alan Goyen directed camp commanders to provide 3 full meals daily with adequate protein, vegetables, and dairy products. This was not generosity. This was policy. But the policy produced unexpected results. German prisoners, accustomed to wartime rationing that had intensified since 1942, encountered an American food system operating at scales they had never witnessed. By July 1943, Camp Alva in northwestern Oklahoma held approximately 3,000 German POWs captured in North Africa. These men came from Rommel's Afrika Korps, veteran soldiers who had fought in Tunisia before surrendering to Allied forces. Camp Alva's mess facilities operated under the supervision of Lieutenant Colonel Victor Emerson. His monthly reports to the Provost Marshal General's office, declassified in 1972, provide detailed accounts of prisoner reactions to American food standards. One report from August 1943 states, prisoners continued to express disbelief at meal quality and quantity. Several have requested permission to write home describing conditions, which has been denied pending mail censorship protocol review. The camp operated a bakery producing 900 loaves of white bread daily. Prisoners received fresh bread with every meal. For men who had eaten dark Kriegs brought war bread made from potato starch, sawdust, and minimal grain, the contrast was stark. Unteroffizier Wilhelm Gellen, captured at Tunisia, told American interrogators in September 1943, "We were told America had no food. We were told you were starving your own people. Then we arrive, and you give us white bread. Every day." Camp Alva also maintained refrigeration units, a rarity in many German military installations. Fresh milk appeared at breakfast. Meat was served at lunch and dinner. Ice cream was provided on Sundays. German military rations in 1943 provided approximately 2,500 calories per day for frontline troops, with meat limited to 2 or 3 times weekly. By 1944, as Germany's food situation deteriorated, even these rations were difficult to maintain. American POW camps served meat daily. War Department procurement records show the military purchased beef, pork, and chicken specifically for POW facilities. Camp Concordia in Kansas, which held 4,000 prisoners, requisitioned 1,200 pounds of fresh beef per day in summer 1944. Camp Ruston in Louisiana ordered similar quantities. A nutritional survey conducted by the Army Medical Corps in January 1945 examined 500 German POWs across 5 camps. The study, published in a declassified report, found average protein intake exceeded 100 grams per day, more than double what these men had consumed in Wehrmacht service. Obergefreiter Franz Schmidt, interviewed at Camp Forest, Tennessee, stated for the record, "In 3 months here, I have eaten more meat than in my last year with my unit." This is not an exaggeration. This is what I remember. The medical benefits were measurable. Camp doctors reported decreased instances of malnutrition-related illnesses. Dental examinations showed improvements in gum health. Physical fitness assessments demonstrated increased strength and endurance. One item generated particular fascination: Coca-Cola. The Coca-Cola Company maintained contracts with the U.S. military to supply soft drinks to bases and camps worldwide. By 1943, this included POW facilities. The War Department approved the provision of soft drinks to prisoners under the Geneva Conventions. Requirements for adequate non-alcoholic beverages. Camp McCain, Mississippi, installed a Coca-Cola dispensary in 1944. Records indicate prisoners received access twice weekly, typically on Wednesday evenings and Sunday afternoons. Each prisoner could purchase 1 bottle using the scrip currency provided for their labor. For many German POWs, this was their first encounter with American soft drinks. Nazi propaganda had portrayed such products as symbols of capitalist decadence and inferior American culture. The reality cold, sweet, carbonated refreshment in the Mississippi heat contradicted the narrative. A report from Camp McCain's commanding officer, dated August 1944, noted, "The Coca-Cola distribution has become the most anticipated event of the prisoners' week. Attendance at evening programs increases significantly on dispensary nights." Jeff writer Otto Brandt told interviewers in 1946, "They gave us Coca-Cola. I had heard of it but never tasted it. We thought it was propaganda, that Americans drank this instead of real drinks because they had nothing else. Then we tried it. It was good. It was very good." Camp Hearne, located near College Station, Texas, held 4,800 German prisoners by late 1943. The camp operated under Colonel Thomas Wilson, whose administration maintained detailed records of daily operations. In December 1943, the camp acquired an ice cream maker. This was not unusual. Army regulations permitted recreational food items for prisoner morale, and ice cream was considered appropriate under Geneva Convention standards. The camp kitchen began producing ice cream twice monthly, serving it with Sunday dinner. The reaction was documented in multiple sources. Colonel Wilson's weekly report to the 8th Service Command, dated December 19, 1943, states, "The introduction of ice cream to Sunday meals has produced notable enthusiasm among the prisoner population. Several prisoners approached guards to ask if this would continue, expressing disbelief that such items were available during wartime." Hauptmann Rudolf Dever, a captured officer held at Hearne, wrote in a letter eventually released to researchers, "Yesterday, they gave us ice cream in Texas, in December, in a prison camp, while there is a war. How is this possible?" The answer lay in American dairy production and refrigeration infrastructure. The United States produced over 115 billion pounds of milk in 1943, far exceeding domestic consumption needs. The dairy industry supplied military contracts while maintaining civilian availability. Creating ice cream for POW camps required no special allocation. It simply utilized existing surplus capacity. But to German prisoners, accustomed to rationed butter and limited milk, the concept of surplus dairy products bordered on the incomprehensible. To understand prisoner reactions, one must understand the food production differential between the United States and Germany in 1943. The U.S. Department of Agriculture reported total American food production in 1943 exceeded 385 million tons. This included wheat, corn, beef, pork, dairy, and vegetables. American agricultural output had increased 25% since 1939, despite millions of men leaving farms for military service. Mechanization, improved fertilizers, and expanded acreage compensated for labor shortages. Germany, by contrast, faced declining agricultural output due to labor shortages, Allied bombing of transportation networks, and loss of agricultural territories in Eastern Europe. By 1943, German civilian rations had been reduced multiple times. Meat allocations dropped to 250 grams per week. Butter fell to 125 grams per week. Bread remained available, but quality deteriorated as wheat was stretched with fillers. German prisoners arriving in America encountered the output of the world's largest agricultural economy, operating at near-peak capacity. A study conducted by the Office of War Information in 1944, examining prisoner attitudes, found that 89% of surveyed POWs expressed surprise at American food abundance. The report stated, prisoners consistently cite food quality and quantity as the most significant disparity between their expectations and reality in American captivity. Some camps allowed prisoners to establish their own bakeries. producing traditional German baked goods using American-supplied ingredients. Camp Crossville, Tennessee, approved such a facility in 1944. The camp provided flour, yeast, sugar, and butter. German bakers among the prisoners produced bread, rolls, and pastries according to their traditional methods. The bakery operated 3 days per week, supplementing the regular American-style meals. Camp reports indicate this program served 2 purposes. First, it maintained prisoner morale by allowing cultural expression through food. Second, it demonstrated American abundance by permitting prisoners to consume additional food beyond standard rations for their own cultural preferences. Oberbootsman Carl Fisher, who worked in the Crossville bakery, stated in a 1947 interview, "They gave us real flour. White flour, all we needed. We made bread like we made at home, before the war. I had not tasted such bread in 4 years." And this was in a prison camp. The psychological impact of this abundance operated on multiple levels. It contradicted Nazi propaganda about American weakness. It demonstrated industrial capacity through seemingly effortless provision of surplus goods. And it forced a reassessment of the economic systems underlying each nation's war effort. American hamburgers became another symbol of cultural economic contrast. Many camps served hamburgers once or twice weekly as part of normal meal rotation. Ground beef, formed into patties, grilled, and served on soft white buns with condiments, represented quintessential American working-class food. For German prisoners, the concept required explanation. Camp Shenango, Pennsylvania, introduced hamburgers to its prisoner population in summer 1943. The camp newsletter, produced by prisoners under guard supervision and archived at the National Archives, included an article explaining hamburger preparation and consumption. The piece noted that prisoners initially approached the meal with suspicion, unfamiliar with the format. By the 3rd serving, requests for hamburgers exceeded other menu options. Jeff writer Hans Walter wrote in a monitored letter, "They make something called a hamburger. It is meat on bread with pickles and sauce. It is somehow very good. We ask for it now." The hamburger's symbolism extended beyond taste. It represented American efficiency, quick preparation, simple ingredients, high nutrition. It embodied democratic culture food, equally available to rich and poor. And it demonstrated abundance meat formed into patties, was a luxury German civilians had not seen since 1940. The War Department conducted nutritional assessments throughout the war to ensure compliance with Geneva Convention requirements. These studies provide quantitative data on the food differential. A survey dated March 1944, examining Camp Indianola, Nebraska, recorded daily prisoner caloric intake at 4,100 calories. Protein averaged 115 grams. Fat content measured 140 grams. Carbohydrates totaled 480 grams. Comparable measurements for German military rations in 1944 showed frontline troops received approximately 2,600 calories when supplies were adequate, which was increasingly rare. Protein averaged 50 grams. Fat content reached 70 grams only when supplemented with margarine. German prisoners in American camps were eating nearly twice the calories and more than double the protein of soldiers still fighting for Germany. This created complex psychological responses. Some prisoners felt guilt. Others felt resentment toward their own government for failing to provide similar standards. Many simply adapted, accepting the improved nutrition as their current reality. Fresh fruit availability particularly impressed prisoners from Northern Europe. American camps received regular shipments of apples, oranges, bananas, and seasonal fruits depending on location. Citrus fruits arrived from California and Florida. Apples came from Washington and New York. Tropical fruits reached camps via military supply chains established for Pacific operations. Camp Clinton, Mississippi, distributed fresh oranges to prisoners 3 times weekly during winter months. The camp commander's report from January 1945 noted, prisoners express gratitude for citrus provision. Several have mentioned they have not eaten fresh oranges in years. Unteroffizier Werner Mies, captured in France, told his interrogators, I had not seen a banana since before the war. We received them here, in a prison camp, in Mississippi. I did not understand how this was possible during wartime. The answer involved American agricultural capacity and logistics. California produced 150,000 tons of oranges in 1944. Florida added another 100,000 tons. This output exceeded civilian demand, allowing military allocation without shortages. The supply chain delivered fresh produce across thousands of miles to remote camps housing enemy prisoners. Coffee availability merits specific attention. German prisoners received real coffee at every meal. This contrasted sharply with ersatz coffee, roasted grain, or chicory substitutes that had become standard in Germany since 1941. Real coffee beans had become virtually unavailable to German civilians and were reserved for military officers and special occasions. The United States imported coffee from Brazil, Colombia, and Central America throughout the war. Military contracts ensured steady supply to all installations, including POW camps. Camp Breckenridge, Kentucky, served coffee 3 times daily to its 3,200 German prisoners. The camp supply records show monthly coffee requisitions of 680 pounds, approximately 2.5 ounces per prisoner per day, matching American soldier allocations. Jeff writer Paul Richter noted in a censored letter, "They give us real coffee every meal." I had forgotten what real coffee tastes like. My family has not had real coffee in 3 years. By 1944, War Department analysts observed measurable changes in prisoner attitudes, partially attributed to sustained exposure to American material conditions, including food abundance. A Provost Marshal General's office report from June 1944 stated, extended observation indicates German POWs demonstrate decreased adherence to Nazi ideology, correlating with length of captivity and exposure to American living standards. Food provision appears significant in this attitudinal shift. The mechanism was straightforward. Nazi propaganda had claimed American economic inferiority. Daily evidence contradicted this claim. Repeated contradiction undermined credibility of other Nazi assertions. This was not immediate. Initial reactions ranged from denial to confusion to suspicion that camps were exceptional cases. But sustained exposure to consistent abundance across hundreds of facilities made exceptionalism arguments unsustainable. Camp interrogators reported increasing willingness among prisoners to criticize Nazi leadership as their captivity extended. A report from Camp Shelby, Mississippi, dated October 1944, noted, prisoners with over 6 months' captivity show markedly different perspectives on German leadership compared to recent arrivals. Food provision is frequently cited as evidence of American economic superiority. Many prisoners worked outside camps on farms, in food processing facilities, or in lumber operations. The Fair Labor Standards Act applied to POW workers, requiring payment of 80 cents per day for their labor. This work exposed prisoners to American agricultural abundance firsthand. German POWs working on Texas cotton farms saw mechanized harvesting equipment, fertilizer application, and irrigation systems. Those assigned to Midwest wheat farms observed combines harvesting hundreds of acres daily. Prisoners working at California food processing plants witnessed industrial-scale canning operations. Obergefreiter Ludwig Stein, who worked at a Nebraska wheat farm during harvest season, stated in a 1946 interview, "I saw one machine cut more wheat in one day than 50 men could cut by hand. And this was one farm. There were thousands of farms." I began to understand why they could feed us so well. The visual evidence of American agricultural industrialization reinforced the daily evidence of food abundance. Prisoners saw not just the results, but the systems producing those results. Army Medical Corps doctors monitoring prisoner health documented physical improvements throughout captivity. A study examining 1,000 German POWs at Camp Monticello, Arkansas, compared their health upon arrival with their condition after 6 months. The research, published in a military medical journal in 1945, found significant improvements in body mass index, dental health, and markers of nutritional deficiency. Average weight gain measured 18 pounds. Incidence of vitamin deficiency declined 87%. Dental examinations showed improved gum health in 72% of subjects. The study concluded, improved nutrition available in captivity has measurably enhanced prisoner health compared to conditions experienced in Wehrmacht service. This data was not propaganda. It was medical assessment conducted according to standard protocols and published in professional literature. By May 1945, when Germany surrendered, over 371,000 German prisoners remained in American custody. Nearly all had experienced the same pattern: arrival expecting hardship, encounter with abundance, and gradual reassessment of pre-war assumptions. The food they received was not charity. It was compliance with international law. But compliance produced consequences beyond treaty obligations. Post-war studies conducted by the U.S. Department of State examined prisoner attitudes after repatriation. A 1947 survey found that 76% of former POWs held favorable views of American economic systems. When asked to identify the most significant factor informing this opinion, 68% cited material conditions in captivity, with food mentioned most frequently. These men returned to a devastated Germany facing severe food shortages. The contrast between American abundance and German scarcity became even more apparent in retrospect. Many former prisoners became advocates for German economic reconstruction along American models. The Provost Marshal General's final report on POW operations, published in 1946, stated, "The treatment of Axis prisoners in accordance with Geneva Convention standards successfully maintained U.S. international obligations while demonstrating American values and economic capacity to former enemy combatants." What began with mockery of American rations ended with measurable shifts in perspective, documented through thousands of interviews, medical assessments, and camp reports now preserved in the National Archives. The story of German POWs and American food reveals something fundamental about how sustained evidence alters belief. Daily meals, repeated hundreds of times over months or years, provided irrefutable data about American industrial capacity. No propaganda could counter the experience of eating fresh steak, real coffee, and white bread day after day while imprisoned. Archives record their disbelief, their confusion, their gradual acceptance, and ultimately their recognition that the world they had been told about did not match the world they encountered. Food accomplished what speeches could not. It was tangible, immediate, and undeniable. The German prisoners who mocked American rations in 1943 returned home in 1946, carrying direct knowledge of American abundance. That knowledge, multiplied across hundreds of thousands of men and shared with millions more through their testimony, helped reshape post-war German understanding of the United States. The meals served in American POW camps between 1943 and 1946 were simply compliance with international law. But their cumulative effect demonstrated a principle. Sustained evidence transforms perception more effectively than any argument. The camps are gone now. The prisoners have aged or passed. But the documented record remains thousands of pages preserved in archives, describing the moment men expected deprivation and found abundance instead.